few people in the room, a bunch of people online, so we're going to talk about scholarships, and maybe we'll end a little early so you can take advantage of this fun snowstorm. So this workshop is about scholarships, so just to jump back for those who weren't in the last session about the overall paying for college deal. Scholarships are one type of fund that you can use to pay for school. They are funds that are free. You don't have to pay them back, which is great. So students, ideally, the more scholarships they get, the less they have to pay, the less they have to borrow. So that's why we're here, to talk about how to get some free money. Okay, so we're going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about some key things to be thinking about, ways to search, and then a few other things to consider as well. Okay, so first, let's just talk about what a scholarship is. So a scholarship is money that a student may get to help pay for school. It does not have to be paid back. That scholarship can be awarded based on a variety of factors. So it could be financial need, it could be their academic performance, it could be test scores, it could be community service, it could be any number of factors. And, well, we'll get into the details as we go. But the key ones are, the language is need and merit. So need is based on a family's financial circumstances. So how much did you make? How much do you have in the bank? Those kinds of things. How much has a student earned? And merit is based on any other factor. So like those other things I mentioned, but again, it could be athletics, any number of things. The reason for that is a scholarship is money that someone has, and they have said, I want to give this to students. Either it's an institution or some other organization or a business or an individual even. They say, I have this money, I want to give it to students, but I only want to give it to these students. I want to give it to young women who are studying engineering, or I want to give it to students who are from Caledonia County, or I want to give it to students who, plan to study in a certain field, but they're also high academic performers, or they've given back to their community in some way. So they're choosing any factor or any combination of factors. So students have to figure out, okay, how can I be eligible for any given scholarship? A thing to think about is scholarships can go to pay for school, but you do want to find out from any given school, how will these be applied? So some schools will say, if you get a scholarship, great, we just apply it on top of any other aid that you get. Occasionally schools will say, we're going to give you a bunch of money because you need it. If you get another scholarship, well, we're just going to take it away from the money we gave you. Now, that's not typical, but it does happen, so it's important to know. All right, so some myths about scholarships. One, my grades aren't good enough. Not all scholarships are based on academics. So having good grades is great, but it doesn't mean if you aren't the best student at your school that you're going to miss out on scholarships. They're not all based on academics. My parents, they make too much money for scholarships. Some scholarships are not based on financial need at all. They're just based on an essay a student writes. They're just based on community service, that kind of thing. So sometimes finances play a role, sometimes they don't. Athletics, obviously there are some athletic scholarships. A lot of them are not, so that's not an often factor. And I haven't chosen a major yet. So again, some are based on what a student plans to study, but they aren't all. So some have nothing to do with what a student plans to study, so it's not a factor. All right, so 3 things to be thinking about in terms of applying for scholarships and being successful. One is communication. If a student applies for the Vermont State Grant, there will be a lot of communication. VSAC will reach out and say, oh, you are missing this piece of information, please supply it. Oh, it looks like you started an application, but you haven't finished it. There's this other thing you need to do. We're going to ask you about that. We'll send you an email. We will put it in your portal, and you can get that communication. If it's complete, you can log in and see, great, my application is complete, I'm just waiting. If you're awarded, you can find that out. However, for scholarships, that is not always the case. So a student applies for a scholarship, they may get a confirmation, thank you for applying, and they may not. If a student is awarded a scholarship, they will find out, but if a student is not awarded, they won't necessarily hear. Sometimes scholarship programs get so many applicants that they'll say, we'll let you know if you get it. If you don't, you won't hear from us. So just be aware with scholarships that communication is not the same as for other types of things, such as aid at a college, where they're going to communicate back and forth with the financial aid office. So it's worth just finding out what will happen if I apply. How am I going to find out? How am I going to, know whether or not I got it? And the other piece with communication is that typically what you can do is reach out to say, I submitted this essay. I uploaded it to your site. Did you get it? And they will tell you, oh, yes, we received this. So often you can ask, is my application complete? And you'll find out, but they're not going to reach out to you to say it's not complete. You have to be the one to reach out and ask. So communication is pretty key. Eligibility requirements, again, because scholarships can be based on any number of factors, you just want to make sure you're actually eligible. So if a scholarship says, this is for students who live in Chittenden County and you live in Franklin County, you're just not going to be eligible. You can apply and have a great application, but you are not eligible because they say you have to live in Chittenden County. Other things, the same. If they say you need to have financial need, you provide information, and they determine, well, you don't have financial need, then you're not eligible. So you want to find scholarships you're eligible for and apply for those. Now, one key thing about that is that sometimes those requirements are vague. So it may say, we're going to base this on academic performance, but that's all they say. Sometimes they will say, you need to have a certain grade point average in school. If you're getting all A's, that's who we want, and they'll tell you that. Other times they'll just say, it's based on academic performance, and so you're just competing against whoever else happens to be applying. So maybe you're a B student, but you're the best student who's applied for that scholarship. So if it's a vague requirement, it's not specific, assume you meet that requirement. Same thing with financial need. You say, I don't know about my financial need, but you're only competing against other people who are applying for that same scholarship. So find out what the eligibility requirements are, be clear about that, apply for scholarships you might be eligible for. And then this competition one, know that scholarships are competitive. So typically for any scholarship program, they have a limited number of scholarships they will award. It may be 1, it may be 10, it may be 50. It really depends. They are all different. But know that in order to get it, you are competing against other people. It is the rare scholarship where everyone who applies gets it. Like that just never happens. So note that if you want to get a scholarship, you want to submit the best application. Definitely make sure you meet the eligibility requirements. Definitely meet whatever the deadline is to apply. Submit everything, submit it on time, and submit your best work. So if it requires an essay, write a good essay. Take the time to submit it because you're competing. So those are the key things with scholarships. All right, so in terms of thinking about scholarships, junior year is a good time to be looking for scholarships because that way you don't have to spend time during your senior year finding them. You can simply apply. Some scholarships are due in your junior year. There aren't a lot of them, but there are a few very competitive scholarships where they say, in your junior year, in the spring typically, that's when you have to start or finish the application process for certain scholarships. So it's worth finding out. Often there are scholarships that are like local. Those are more later. It's the national ones that have kind of earlier deadlines often. It's just sort of a general rule. So for senior year, you really want to be thinking about like other deadlines, like college deadlines. So admissions deadlines are often deadlines for scholarships. Sometimes just applying for admission, you're applying for scholarships at that school. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Make sure you meet the deadline. If they have a particular deadline for a particular scholarship, meet that as well at a particular school. You can check in with the counseling office and note timelines for VSAC as well. So this booklet, the Scholarships for Vermonters booklet, if you're here, there's some in the back. If you're online, this is available as a PDF or it might be available in the school counseling office. If you were at the last workshop, sorry for repeating myself. But this booklet for VSAC has a bunch of scholarships for Vermonters. It's a whole bunch in there, so it's something you want to look at. The timeline for that is key. if you want to apply for those, make sure you meet the deadline. Plenty of students every year just miss the deadline and they're just not eligible. So it's worth planning ahead. Find out what are the deadlines you're coming up against. Okay. Yeah, so the question is the VSAC scholarship book outdated? Yeah, so this booklet that's available, the one that's online and the one that's available in hard copy, the deadline was, well, it was technically March 1st, even though it says the 14th of February on here. We extended it this year. So it's outdated because it was only for students who are applying for next year, but there are typically not too many changes to the booklet. So the majority of scholarships will stay the same. Sometimes a scholarship will leave or a new one will be added, but you can really get a good sense of the scholarships here, even though a new one will come out in the fall. So typically that's going to come out by October 1st. So the other thing I said is check with the school counseling office, because these scholarship booklets go to school counseling offices, and lots of school counseling offices will have a list of local scholarships, and they update those regularly. Sometimes it's a folder in the counseling office. Sometimes there's an online list with links. It just depends on schools. I've seen lots of different ways to do it. Okay, so in terms of your college or university, again, you want to meet that deadline either for admissions or for particular scholarships. If they have one, often, again, just applying for admission is applying for them. And you want to check with them, if I get a scholarship from outside your institution, will it have any impact on my aid? Now, if you do really well and you get a ton of financial aid, but the school's awarded you a loan, maybe you get a scholarship and now you're just reducing the loans you have. What a deal. So sometimes schools will just say that. If you get another scholarship, the first thing we're going to do is take away loans, then we'll take away work study, and then you have too much. Wouldn't that be great if everybody has too much? All right. So the booklet I mentioned, again, it's going to be available typically by October 1st. We have that available. In general, the deadline is in February sometime. Again, this year was as late as March 1st, so it'll be printed on there and you'll see that. But it's available early enough that students can look through and find scholarships that they might be eligible for. What I see for students, there's like 100 and something scholarships in here. They'll go through that booklet. If they can find 10, that's a lot, because that's just the way scholarships work. Like, students just aren't eligible because they're not meeting some criteria. So that's the thing about these. It's like it takes time. So in this booklet, it's handy because there's so many in one place. You have to be a Vermont resident. So you can go through and say, oh, I don't live in Caledonia County, cross that off. Oh, I'm not studying nursing, cross that off. Oh, here's one, perfect for me. You circle that one, you move on, and you just apply for those. So 5 to 10, that's typically what I see in terms of students applying for the ones in this booklet. Now, that is true for other scholarships too. That any other scholarship that's out there, you know, you're just not going to be eligible for most of them. That's the way it goes. All right. So again, one thing to think about, these are the kinds of scholarships that are often in school counseling offices that are very localized. So if you have to live in a particular town or particular couple of towns, if you have to attend a certain high school, sometimes high schools have, you know, a scholarship or a fund that someone has contributed, and say, like, if you're attending Randolph High School and you want to go on, then, you know, apply for the scholarship because we have some funds, but you have to go there. Sometimes town offices have them. Employers sometimes have scholarships. So it could be that a student works at Hannaford and there's a scholarship for employees. And so, great, you can apply for that scholarship. Sometimes parents' employers have scholarships for their family members. So it's worth looking into those because, you know, your competition is going to be limited in that sense. And then there are community groups like the ones listed here on the slide, where sometimes it's like you have to be a member or sometimes just live in the community and they have scholarships. Lots of local ones affiliated with groups like this. And then you could think a little more broadly. So those local ones are great because there's going to be just less competition. If you have to attend a certain high school, well, it's just your senior class you're competing against. Then you can do more broad scholarship searches. So these are some examples, these sites, where students could do a much broader search or apply for other types of scholarships that aren't local. Now, the benefit of this is, like, you know, you can go to FastWeb and you plug in a bunch of information. I live here. Oh, my parent is a veteran, I plan to study engineering, whatever it may be, it will come up with a list for you. But often those are going to be much more competitive because they're national scholarships. So your competition is just a lot of people. You know, there's a Coca-Cola scholarship. It's huge. If you get that, you're good because it's a lot of money. But how many people are going to apply for that? A lot of people are. So definitely consider these. Take the time if you can to apply for these broader scholarships. Through these, you can find often scholarships that may be more targeted, may be more focused. So it's worth looking broadly. Okay, so again, you want to think of this as like a big ring of how to find scholarships. So you're going to narrow it down until you're very narrow. So you're starting with scholarships that are very local to you, your high school, your town, your region. Then you're going to go out to something like the VSAC scholarship booklet where there may be scholarships in there for students across the whole state. And then you're going to look more broadly at bigger scholarships, regional, national scholarships. So kind of think of it that way. Apply for scholarships where there's the least competition, and then if you have to spend time on this, go for the ones with the least competition first, and then the ones that have more competition beyond that. Because you could spend all your time in big national scholarships because the payoff's big, but your competition's so big you're less likely to get them. So maybe you get a $500 scholarship because your competition was less, but you got that $500 rather than nothing. So that's one way to think of it. All right, word about this because this is sometimes a concern for students and for families. It's like, well, how do I know this is real? Someone says, oh, there's a scholarship, you should apply for this. If they're asking for money, to give you money, you might want to be concerned about that. Typically, scholarships, you do not have to pay to apply. Something like, hey, you're a finalist, we got you. Like, all you have to do is this one little piece. You might want to be skeptical of that. And if someone says that they're going to do the work for you, then you should be skeptical of that. Because there's one key to understanding scholarships is that it takes a lot of work. The reason a lot of students don't get scholarships is that alone. It takes time and effort to get them. First, you have to look for them. That takes a while to find the scholarships you might be eligible for. Then you have to apply. And it might be like a bunch of different sites. So you have to apply to this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. They all have separate applications. VSAC scholarship booklet is great because you can combine them into one application, but other scholarships don't work that way. So it can take a while to find them, take a while to apply. If someone says they're going to do the work for you, that's just not the case. You gotta work for it. Okay, so some key things here, just to summarize a little bit. Make sure you're eligible, find the ones you're eligible for, follow the instructions carefully. If they say we need an essay and it needs to be 250 words or less, do not make it 260 words. Make sure 250 words or less. If they say they want a recommendation letter from someone where you've done community service, and you're like, yeah, but my coach would write a better letter. Don't get the one from your coach. Follow the directions. Exactly what they're looking for, submit it. Make sure you meet the deadline. The VSAC scholarship booklets, historically, there are tons of people who just miss the deadline. Like they go to apply and they miss the deadline and they're like, well, why didn't I get any? It's like, well, you just missed the deadline. Or students wait till the very last minute and they miss out because they're like, well, I had to upload my essay and the power goes out that night. And they can't. So they missed the deadline. So it's just important to find out what the deadline is and meet it. And then finally, find out if everything was in there. So if you apply for a scholarship anywhere, as much as you can, try and make sure that what you sent is there, which is why it's helpful to beat the deadline. Because if you can apply early enough, then you have time to follow up and say, did you get the essay that I sent? Is my application complete? You can find out if it's done. All right. So after all of this process happens, you've applied, you've met the deadline, then what happens is somebody is going to say who of all these applicants is going to get the scholarship. That can happen in a bunch of different ways. Maybe one individual, maybe a group of people, maybe there's a committee of some kind. They're going to say, great, 100 people applied, here's the one person. Then they're going to reach out to that person and let them know. Now, sometimes when you apply, you can find out, well, if I get this, how will I find out and when will I find out? It can be helpful to know that when you apply. For the VSAC scholarships, like whether you get it or not, you're going to get some kind of notification. Other organizations don't necessarily do that. So again, find out how that's going to work. You know, and if you don't get it, you don't get it. That's what happens. For a lot of students, like the understanding is I'm going to apply for a bunch of scholarships and know that I will not get them all. So it can be discouraging because like, I did all this work and I applied for all these scholarships and I only got one, applied for 10. I only got one, that's only 10% of the scholarships. But if you think of it in terms of time, then it usually pays off. So if it takes you like, you know, a couple of hours to do every scholarship application, right? And it's 20 hours of work to apply for 10, and then you get $1,000, like that's not a bad hourly rate. Like you're not gonna get that at Hannaford where maybe you got the scholarship. So it's worth taking the time for most students to do it. But the warning is it takes time. At 20 hours, just saying that is like, that is a lot of time. So students have to put in the time to apply in order to get scholarships. All right, so key things to remember, again, it's based on a competitive process, so do your best work. Think about the big ones, but apply local first, and then what's gonna happen if you get a scholarship at a particular school. Now again, often it's just tacked on, but just find out ahead of time so you're not surprised. Is there any impact? And sometimes the school will say, nope, we'll just add it on. Other times you'll find out. You may be able to just find that on a website. For financial aid at a school, you may have to ask. Okay, if you go to this website, vsac.org/CCP, bunch of resources and links on there about scholarships. So if you didn't pick something up here or you're at home, know that all of this is available for you to peruse or print out if you like. And that's it. Questions about scholarships from anyone in the room or online if you did not get your question answered? Yes. All right, so if I understand your question correctly, so apply to school and they've then respond and say, here's some money we can give you when they're accepted. Is that correct? Yeah, so that's, again, sometimes just applying for admission is applying for some of that scholarship money. So a school may, just based on that admissions application, say, oh great, you are a great student, we really want you to come to our school, so we're gonna give you an incentive to do that. So they will provide a scholarship. Sometimes it's very straightforward for them. Sometimes, again, it's just based on whatever criteria they have. So yes, scholarships can sometimes come. Congratulations, you're accepted. Here's the presidential scholarship you've been awarded for $5,000 per year. So yes, sometimes it can happen that way.
Now, what about applying for, once they're in college, applying for other scholarships that are out there, like some of these national ones, like if you're in school for mechanical engineering, you apply for like the ASME scholarships.
All right, so the question is if you, when you're already in college, what about scholarships then? Well, it's a good question because one thing I didn't mention is that sometimes scholarships are renewable and sometimes they're not. So that's one piece to think about, that sometimes a student will get a scholarship and it's only for that first year. Now they may be able to reapply in their second year or third year for the same scholarship. And then often students can apply for scholarships when they're already in school. So sometimes the criteria for a scholarship is you must be a high school senior in order to apply. So if you get it, great. If you don't, you cannot apply the next year. But others will say any student or a student who is in school specifically or for further study. So sometimes if you, maybe you apply for a scholarship, you don't get it, you can apply again, or you learn about a new one, you can apply for that once you're in school. It depends on the criteria, so it's worth checking out. Right, so how do you find them? So in this scholarship booklet from VSAC, it will say right in there, you have to be a high school student. This is for any student. This is for college students. So that's one source. It's very clear in there. Other scholarships will usually say, there's not like a, I don't know, you can't necessarily narrow it down to say like, oh, if I meet exactly these criteria. The national searches will do that, but they're not perfect. So sometimes you just have to weed through. Other questions? Anything online that's not answered? Great. Yes. Can you apply for scholarships before you get accepted into a school? Yes, in fact, you should do that. Ideally, what happens is you apply for school, you find out if you're accepted, and then overall, you're going to find out about general financial aid. That might be when you're accepted, you get a scholarship or a grant from the school. But then you're also going to find about other financial aid you've applied for, like through the FAFSA, the Vermont State Grant Program. If the timing is ideal, you find out about scholarships before you have to decide where you're going to go. So you want to apply for those before you're accepted because you want to be able to, before you say yes to a particular school, then you want to have as much financial information as you can. That said, it doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you apply for a scholarship early. Like you might apply in January of your senior year in high school, and then you get your admissions applications in, you find out where you're accepted, but you don't find out about that scholarship until June or July. In fact, some schools will, like during graduation even, announce scholarships. So it's it can't help you decide about going to a school because you know the full costs, but it's going to help you wherever you go. So should you apply before you go? Absolutely. Or before you apply, yes. All right. Well, thanks for joining. If you're here in the room, enjoy your ride back, walk back, ski back, whatever it is. And if you're online, hopefully you're cozied up in your jammies already. So thanks for joining us.